Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kay and today I'm going to be doing a series spotlight video. So this is basically just a review of an entire series rather than just like the first book in the series or whatever. This is sort of my test run. I'm going to see how well it goes and maybe tweak it going forward because I would like to do more of these simply because I read so many series and it just seems like it might be nice to do like a dedicated review to a single book in the series, but then once I get through the whole thing, to do like kind of a combined review and kind of go over how the series worked as a whole rather than as just individual books. So the series that I'm going to be talking about today is the Jackaby series. So it's a 4-book series. The first book being Jackaby, and then you have Beastly Bones, Ghostly Echoes, and The Dire King. So this is a YA fantasy series. It is a Sherlock retelling, so you have Jacobi, who is a supernatural detective. He can see like auras and magic, like traces of magic, and he can see kind of behind the illusions and the glamours that the fairy folk use to disguise themselves when they're in the mundane world. And then you have Abigail Rook, who is his assistant. She is from England. She kind of ran away from home to go on an archaeological dig that ended up just being a bust, and rather than going home, she just kind of caught the first ship that she could, and it happened to be coming to America. So she ended up in New Fiddleham, New England, and came across a job posting in the post office, showed up on Jacobi's doorstep to apply for the job, and he took her on kind of on a probationary period to see how she would work out. This series is set in the late 1800s, I believe, so the technology is of that time period. They are just starting to get electricity, I believe, so it is kind of like an old world type of setting. And the other two characters who play a prominent role in the series are Jenny Cavanaugh, who is a ghost who lives in the house that Jacobi and Abigail reside in. It was originally her house, and she was a murder victim, so she was brutally murdered. Her case is still unsolved. Jacobi has been trying to figure it out and help her, but she is unable to remember anything, so she can't really help him fill in any of the details. So as of the start of the series, it is still an unsolved murder 10 years after it happened. The other prominent character is Charlie Kane. He is a local police officer in New Fiddleham, and Jacobi and Abigail meet him during the course of an investigation during the first book in the series. And then he, of course, plays a role then throughout the rest of the series. So without going to any spoilers yet, I really enjoyed this series as a whole. I was surprised because I typically don't care for YA, like I've said before. But I picked this up purely off of like the cover. I kept seeing the cover here and there, and it just looked really cool and interesting. It seemed to have this sort of atmosphere to it that just looked intriguing. So I picked it up from the library and read it, and like I said, I was really surprised by how much I did enjoy it. It's a fun type of read. It's not anything serious or complex or anything like that, and I don't think it's meant to be. So I was totally fine with that. As far as the characters go, Jacobi is this eccentric, oddball character. He kind of runs around all over the place, and his mind is constantly jumping from this to this to this to this. He's easily distracted, and he focuses so hard on, the supernatural because he has this sight. He focuses on all the supernatural things, the auras and, whatever else, the traces left behind by the Fae, that he tends to miss some of the more mundane but obvious things, which is where Abigail comes in. She is excited to be a detective, and he keeps correcting her and saying, that she is just his assistant, but she does manage to get herself a little notebook to take notes like a proper detective, and she is the one who kind of notices the regular stuff that he tends to overlook. So she's the one who notices things like a crumpled letter in the trash can or other non-magical clues and bits of evidence. So she does play an active role in the series, in the partnership, especially more so in books 2, 3, and 4. You see her role kind of become more prominent. In the first book, she's still finding her feet and trying to figure out how best to help Jacobi. solve the murders and things like that. But after that, she definitely has a more integral role going forward, which is something that I was really happy with. I was really glad that she wasn't just this window dressing. The story is told from her perspective, so it's as if she is writing it down and recording the investigations, similar to how Watson does for Sherlock in the Sherlock Holmes books. Something else that I really enjoyed was the fact that there is an overarching plot and an overarching kind of storyline through the 4 books. So after I read the first one, I kind of assumed that each book would be more or less kind of episodic and, you know, follow the similar story beats, but be more or less a self-contained story. And while that's true to some point, books 2, 3, and 4 especially do have an interconnectedness, especially books 3 and 4. Those could almost be like 2 halves of one book. If he had wanted to make that last book just longer, those books could almost be combined because they are, you know, that integrated. But I was really happy to find that it wasn't just one of those series where it's like almost the same story every time, just slightly different. So that made me really happy. I gave every book in the series 4 stars, and as a whole, as a full series, I would give the full series probably like 4, almost 5 stars. I really, really enjoyed it, and I would recommend it to anyone who is a fan of like murder mystery Sherlock Holmes type stuff, or like the Fae, because you do get a lot of different kinds of creatures and fairies and things of that nature. So anyone who likes that kind of thing, I think would definitely enjoy this book. So I'm going to go into spoilers now. So if anyone has not read the series and wants to, doesn't want to be spoiled, now would be the time to skip to the end or run off and get the first book in the series and get to reading. The first thing I want to talk about is the relationships in this series. So you have a few different ones. You have obviously Abigail and Jackaby. And I really like their dynamic. Like I said, she kind of picks up the slack for what he doesn't always notice during investigations. But beyond just how they work together and what roles they play in this partnership, they do have a very nice dynamic. He will occasionally give her advice on like things like her love life, or, you know, how she's doing as far as being a detective and being in this investigative field. And she also will then give him advice because he doesn't always deal with other people extremely well. He reminds me a lot of Newt Scamander from the Fantastic Beasts movie, just because he's got this kind of social awkwardness, this quirky way, I don't know. When I was reading it, I just kept picturing the Newt Scamander character, Eddie Redmayne, I think is who plays him. I just kept picturing him as Jackaby. And so I think if they ever were to adapt this series into like TV or movie, they should try to get him because I think he'd do a really good job. But anyway, back to what I was saying. So she sometimes will point out to him that maybe he's being a bit insensitive, or, you know, maybe he needs to handle things a little differently to get a better outcome. And while he's not always receptive to that, and sometimes he's not even listening when she's saying it, it does sometimes get through, and he's like, oh, okay, maybe you're right. So their relationship, especially as the series goes on, and he starts to rely on her more for things, and kind of notices how important of a part that she is playing. I really enjoyed their dynamic. And then at the end, he gives his sight to her when he dies. He kind of wills it toward her and trusts her to be able to handle it and to be able to use it. And so that just shows kind of how much trust that he has in her. And I really liked that ending. I mean, obviously, thankfully he doesn't die, but he does give her the sight, and now she has it at the end, so now she's the investigator, and he kind of passes the reins off to her, and I really liked how that played out. And then you have Jenny and Abigail, who become really close, especially starting in the second book after Abigail has lived in the house for a little while. Her and Jenny get to be very close. Jenny, lends her clothes that are left from when she was alive. And they give each other advice. Jenny especially gives Abigail a lot of advice concerning Charlie, which is Abigail's love interest. Kind of, you know, encouraging her to pursue him and not just let things, you know, lie, to go after the guy that she wants to, despite all of the obstacles and the problems that the relationship might cause. She's always just, you know, trying to help Abigail, and Abigail in return tries to help Jenny, especially in the later books where Jenny is trying to figure out who murdered her and why. She's trying to like increase her presence in the physical world. So like at the beginning she can only touch things that were hers, and Jacobi is trying to help her, like, you know, you can touch anything that you believe you have a right to hold, to touch. And, you know, Jenny at first is very reluctant and doesn't believe him. But Abigail is able to go in and talk to her and work with her kind of secretly, and they form this really like close bond. It was just really nice to see that kind of friendship between two women in a story. Then you have Abigail and Charlie, and their relationship is obviously a romantic one. So they meet in the first book. There's kind of these little inklings, little like, ooh, butterflies. And then it progresses through the books, but I felt like it was done well. It was kind of a natural, slow progression, which is how I prefer like love stories to go. I hate insta-love, but I also hate like the really quick, like, oh, I've known you for a very short amount of time, or we're in this very stressful situation, and so, no. They don't do any of that, and I'm very appreciative of that. The circumstances around them aren't pushing them and accelerating their relationship, which I definitely appreciate, because I hate when any of that is in my books. It's okay in like movies sometimes, like I'll watch a rom-com and it's fine if I'm in the mood for it, but when I read a book I tend to really not like it. So I appreciated how well the author handled their romantic plotline. It never took over. The story is from Abigail's point of view, but at no point does her relationship with Charlie overtake the rest of the narrative and the investigation and the murder mystery part of it. It's always very much kind of this like low-key side plot thing that's going on. And yes, I was so happy when Charlie didn't die. On the one hand, I like when characters die, which seems odd and a little terrible, because I really like Charlie, but I was also happy that he died, because you need to have some sort of consequence for the immensity of the conflict. There needs to be a consequence, and so I did like that Charlie died, but I knew that they were going to bring him back, because you had the Twain, and earlier it had been established that a Twain can give up his life for another person, and so I figured that was what was going to happen, but I was okay with it, because then Charlie and Abigail got their happily ever after, so that's fine. That brings us to Jenny and Jacobi, and this was the only one that I wasn't crazy about. I appreciated their relationship at the beginning, because it was a little, you know, like tug of war. They were always kind of butting heads over things, because Jacobi is inconsiderate about the space. So it did used to be Jenny's home, and he just comes in and he's kind of wrecking things and adding things onto the house and making a mess and kind of just tearing stuff up. And so Jenny is always kind of, you know, on to him about, don't tear up everything and don't destroy all of my belongings. I am still living here, albeit as a ghost. So they had this almost, not antagonistic, but just like they would needle each other a little bit, and that was fun. But then in especially like the last book, you picked it up a little bit in book 3, but then especially in book 4, it veered into this romantic type of relationship, and I wasn't crazy about that, because it seemed a little sudden. Maybe if I reread them, I would pick up a bit more on it, but it just seemed like after Abigail went to the underworld or the afterlife or whatever and brought back Jenny's fiance's ghost, and then of course he doesn't get to leave because he gets dragged back in, But they get to say goodbye, him and Jenny get to say goodbye or whatever, and she finds out that he didn't leave her, he did not, you know, run off and just, you know, left her behind or anything like that. And then they got their goodbye. But it just seemed like after we had that, and she got that closure or whatever, then it was just like all of a sudden, oh, she's like super into Jacobi. And then you're kind of wondering if Jacobi also is reciprocating those feelings or not. Or if he's just oblivious to the whole thing and really doesn't notice her. That was the only part of the entire series, I think, where I was like, oh, I don't know how crazy I am about that. But, I mean, if that's my only complaint out of all 4 books, I guess I don't have too much to really complain about. But I think I would have been happy with that just not happening. Other than that, I did enjoy each mystery. So we had some cool creatures. Like I said, we had the chameleomorphs from the 2nd book. I think that was my favorite creature being thing, where they turn into little kitten fish and then a full-on dragon, which was cool. Really enjoyed that the dragon just ate Nellie, just like bam, dead, bye. And that she doesn't come back. I mean, we get to see her in the underworld afterlife part for a minute, but I mean, she's dead, and that thing just like scooped her up, and it was all very kind of sudden. And I do tend to like when characters die, so that was like, oh, thanks. So I do think that was my favorite like creature or whatever from the whole series. But other than that, I think I've gone over everything that I wanted to talk about. So I'm going to wrap it up here. That's going to be it for today. Thanks for sticking around. Like and subscribe down below if you want. Leave a comment if you have read one or all or, you know, whatever of these books. And let me know what you thought about them. Also, if you know of any other series or books that are similar at all to these books, do let me know, because I'm always looking for more books to read. And I will see you guys next time. Bye!